Okay, first, let's talk about a little bit of interesting history about Hungary in the 20th century, which is kind of interesting. And what follows here, by the way, is kind of going to be a hodgepodge. I haven't written a book about it, although once we get into it a little bit, you'll think maybe that I have been writing a book about it. But these are just some issues that come off the top of my head about Hungary in no particular order, but I'm going to try to touch the bases and make my point about why this is to point to Hungary. It's a ridiculous thing. Hungary, for example, has experienced one of the most severe demographic declines of anybody in the world we know. Just for example, Russia is losing population. Japan is losing population. The United States would be losing population if it weren't for the immigration that we have. That is actually saving us, and why that is I'll go into in a minute. It's predominantly Latino, or Latinx, which is the current politically correct phrase for it. Yeah, I don't know, but I add that because some people would jump on me and say, Jake, you're not being politically correct. But the fact of the matter is that this immigration is one thing that's saving our bacon. And really, talking about Republicans as nationalists, if you're going to be an American nationalist, you're going to have an economy, right? Everybody pretty much agrees with that. You're going to have to be continuing to offer these social programs which have been so beneficial to the working class. You're going to have workers' comp. You're going to have unemployment benefits. You're going to have all these things because according to this model, which is basically the New Deal model, I mean, it goes back further than the New Deal, but it's kind of crystallized in a very big way in the New Deal. You're going to have this model because of a theory. And this is something that's not talked about very much, but I'm going to talk about it. There's two opposing theories of economic viability. One is the middle class, and that is basically the FDR model, the New Deal, the Second Bill of Rights, and that has proved out. In the United States, the middle class is the great economic engine of this economy. I think oligarchs don't like that very much, but as a consequence, all these programs, which people call socialist, these are incentives in order to make the middle class this great linchpin, this great thing for the economy. So like I said, you have to be able to support them. You have to have people who can work, who can pay taxes. And obviously, if they're going to do that, there's got to be something in it for them. And I think that the people coming to this country actually really understand that with all the problems that this country has, this is still really a good place to come. And this is part of the idea, because this is a kind of an overarching concept that people don't talk about it. They like to relegate it, as I said, to socialism. It's not socialism. It's investing in the economic engine, which is the middle class. So you've got to invest in them. You do want them, as I said, to get unemployment benefits. You want them to have workers' compensation. You want them to have rights to education and all the rest. And if you don't do that from a nationalistic standpoint, you're cutting the throat of the country in the real world. Because here, immigration is the tradition. It's not the exception, it's the tradition. So let's keep it going. So if we're going to talk about Hungary, it's important to know that Hungary is one of the truly unhappy nations. And this goes back to the Treaty of Versailles, because in this treaty, the Hungarians, who are also known as the Magyars, and I'm going to take a moment to dissect this just a little bit. Magyars, Magyars, the Magyars. They're also called the Magyars. I tend to be a little bit obtuse in my pronunciation, so I say the Magyars, but they could all be called the Magyars. In any event, they're the Hungarians, and they're what the Hungarians used to be called, or were called, kind of interchangeably. And they were deprived of much of their privileged status. A lot of these places, Romania, Slovakia, Lithuania, Poland, especially Eastern Poland, these were under the control going back to about, I want to say 1850. Don't everybody jump on Jake and say, oh, no, it wasn't all in 1850. I'm going back to about 1850, and I'll explain why in a minute. They were under control. They were under Hungarian control. And the Treaty of Versailles, in the Treaty of Versailles, Hungary was basically stripped of these hinterlands, which they had formerly held sway over and cities, great cities like Vienna and Budapest. So without these hinterlands, which would have made them economically viable, the situation was inevitably going to change. Now, let's talk briefly about the Hungarian language. The Hungarian language is not a Slavic language. It belongs to the Urals Altaic language group. There are certain parallels to Finnish, yes. This is very interesting. There are very, very distant echoes of Japanese, and this doesn't totally not make sense when you think about the fact that that's coming from the steppes in Central Asia. So the unfortunate history of Hungary is this: the Magyars were the landed ones at one time. Of all the people around them, they were what the old Romans would call the latifundi, the great farm owners, so to speak. The latifundi, that an ancient Roman thing, we can talk about that at some time. It's not more important to explain it further than to just say the name latifundi. The situation of the Magyars is important to the buildup of World War I. Anytime you had Serbia, for example, or trying to make a nationalistic appeal, which in these cases is really kind of an ethnic nationalistic appeal to the subject nationalities of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it generally involved these people that I just mentioned that were run by the Hungarians. And as I said, it goes back to about 1850 because Hungary and Austria were in crisis. The solution at that time, it was decided, was to have a kind of a devolution, you might say, and therefore places like Vienna and Budapest, capitals of separate countries, they would have, at the very least, they would have local autonomy in every way. Okay, they would have the same foreign policy. They would have the same defense policy. They would have, in some aspects, they would have the same economic policy. These things would be shared. As a part of this, it was decided that each of them, that is, the Austrians and Hungarians, would each by themselves take care, if you will pardon me for saying so, of their own barbarians. So that's how they started, and particularly the Hungarians, who were much disliked by these peoples that they lorded over, the Romanians and the other peoples that we mentioned before. All of these aforementioned aspired in the 19th centuries to all become independent outside of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I mentioned World War I here, and I'm getting to World War I. The only way this could have been avoided was through the instrumentality of Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria. Remember, the guy who was assassinated in August of 1914 by Gavrilo Princips, basically was the spark that exploded the tinderbox that started World War I. His idea, and this is interesting, you could say that he was like the last great hope for this situation, because his idea had been to make it a triple monarchy. In other words, whereas it had been Austria and it had been Hungary, it would now be Austria and Hungary, but it would also be the Slavic-speaking Czechs and Slovaks and a few others like that. If that had been allowed to happen, it could have brought about, you could have had really at least a more representative government. People would not be so upset. It would have been a better mix. So getting back to the system from 1850 on till about 1914, every time you had a crisis under this system, the Hungarians would lean on the Viennese, and they would say, listen, we've got to solve this. But also to the Slavic-speaking Czechs and the Slovaks and peoples like that. So when the Hungarians came to the Viennese would go to Berlin, saying, look, you've got to protect us. We're your only ally. If you want to have this alliance, then you've got to do this. You've got to protect us. And because of this, these Magyars had a big role in the coming of World War I. And the thing that you want to remember about Hungary is that it has, in many ways, the most tragic outcome in the aftermath of World War I. In 1919, for example, we have this really interesting thing, the Third Communist Revolutionary Government in Central and Western Europe under Bela Kun, and this is in Budapest. This was a communist government. It was never really viable, and it was replaced. It was actually replaced by a fascist government, which would be, just if you're keeping score, that would be the Admiral Horthy regime. After World War I, there was a whole alliance. It involved Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia. Once again, the great powers trying to figure out how to resolve the situation. This was known by the name the Little Entente. It was promoted by France. It was a system that really was against the Hungarians, and this is one of the this is what came rather of the attempts of the Hungarians to make a comeback in the aftermath of World War I. And by the way, for all of you Republicans out there and all of you other people who are watching PB&J who think the Hungarian system is such a great system and that Orban is such a great leader, Hungary has been against the United States. They were an enemy state in World War I and World War II. They're not a traditional friend of the United States. And you might also say that they have not gone out of their way to change that. It is true that they joined NATO in March of 1999, which is about the time when Putin was taking over Russia. And that is considerably before the current situation. But I guess that mitigates things a little bit, but they have not really been friendly to the United States. So there's that to consider when you invite Orban over to CPAC to talk about how great he is and how great Hungary is. So anyway, over the past 10 years, there's been a big demographic decline, and that falls in the previous decade, basically the time of Orban. Hungary, with a population of 9 to 10 million, has actually lost 350,000 people in its population. And what is the reason for this? Well, for one thing, life expectancy is low. Hungary is a poor country, not wealthy, not successful. So the question, and no immigration, they hate immigration. So the question you would want to ask Orban is, have you kept your population going? And the answer really would have to be no. They're hysterically, as I said, opposed to immigration, and this would have to do with the situation which occurred after they lost, with what they lost after World War I. So imagine you're a young person in Hungary. You have an education. What do? You leave. And thanks to the European Union, you can do this. You can go to Paris. You can go to London. You can go to Brussels. You can go to Rome. You can go to really any of these places, and you can get a job. So no immigration, and some of this has to do with alcohol. The birth rate is also low, which is something that Orban wants to celebrate, but this is really not a good thing. This is not what you want if you're going to remain viable as a country, especially these United States. Here's another thing. Do you look forward to having a comfortable retirement? Do you look forward to being a senior citizen or not? In Hungary, only about 7% of the population polled think that they will be able to have a comfortable old age and enjoy being a senior citizen. On the other hand, the world average when asked this question is on average, it's 33%. So that's kind of low there. Hungary, 7%, a world average, 33%. It's kind of low. To compare, the United States is at 40%, which makes it number 10 in the entire world, which is not great, but certainly not bad. The entire world, lots of nations there. Number 10, that's not bad. Now interestingly, you have places like Turkey where it is high as 66%. Then you have places like France and Italy, which are both in the teens, I would say. I want to say 17 and 16 or 16 and 15% respectively. I don't have the exact, but that's basically what it is. So basically, what you have in Hungary is you have a pessimistic country. And the idea in America, of course, is embodied in the place on the Statue of Liberty, which is to say, give me your tired, you're hungry, you're poor, you're huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. I will feed them. I will give them jobs. I will make them into an economic powerhouse. But this is not the way it is in Hungary. So if you think of this as a reason to point to the Viktor Orban government in Hungary as a model government and a model leader, the statistics really don't seem to bear this out. If Hungary wants to make good on this, they're really going to have to deal with some of this stuff. So what does this mean for the United States? What does it mean for Republicans? What does it mean for all you guys who are watching PB&J? Well, I'll tell you, it means several things, but very much to the point, it means that the Republicans are selling you a bill of goods, so to speak. They're selling you a bunch of baloney and malarkey about the supposedly great successes of someone like Viktor Orban. As I observed before, this is just not the case. Well, that was a long one. I wanted to talk to you about it, though, and I hope that you got something out of it and that you will adopt these things. And when people come to talk to you, your Republican friends, colleagues, talk to you about Viktor Orban and Hungary, that you will be a little bit better armed to talk with them. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching PB&J. I am Jake, your political reporter and commentator and thought provider, and we will see you in the next video.